Hello, Internet. My name is the Golden Stalfos, and welcome to the 5th entry in our series where we review every single Zelda game ever made. Today, we've made it all the way up to Ocarina of Time. And, oh boy, is this one to talk about. So, a lot of people grew up playing Ocarina of Time when they were young, and a lot of people still think of it as the best game ever, period, full stop. And those people are crazy. No, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad game. I played Ocarina for the first time when I was 17, which was like, oh god, I'm old. 7 years ago now? Jesus Christ. So, yeah. But, at that point, I had already played most of the games in the franchise, and I was going out of my way to play older titles that I had missed. And so, there are no nostalgia goggles when I say that Ocarina of Time is a very good game. However, it suffers many issues, partially due to when it was developed, partially due to the console it was developed for, and, partially just failures by comparison to later titles. So let's get into it. So first of all, it's important to note that Ocarina of Time is A Link to the Past, another one, but this time in 3D. There's just no sugarcoating it. It's the same plot, a lot of the same characters, a lot of the same locations. You got the same overall structure for the pacing of the game. I mean, it's very similar. And there are some issues with it. For one thing, the blockiness of N64 graphics means that it's really hard to see clear details on certain things. You mostly just get shape and color and not so much texture or shadows and things like that. There are textures and shadows in the programming sense, but and additionally, there's a bit of a shift in terms of how you play, right? Because there was a big shift in values, right? So early NES games were programmed on the principle of arcade titles, right? We want our players to die and replay and die and replay as much as possible. We want to stretch out the relatively small amount of space we have so that players don't feel like their time, like they aren't getting their money's worth out of the game. And that kind of carried over into the SNES era, but they were much more willing to build out, right? SNES games didn't have anywhere near the same limitations in terms of, memory space that early NES titles did. And people had already, kind of gotten tired of that whole die and try again formula. So what a lot of people were doing was building bigger areas to explore and making paths that forced you to go through more stuff, right? And you might reasonably think that, the N64 is a huge upgrade over the SNES. It has way more memory space and way more graphical capabilities and CPU power, and everything is better. It went from a 16-bit system to a 64-bit system. And, there are a couple of problems with this. So one, Yes, there's more memory space, but now the graphics take up more space because they're, 3D polygons. And you have to work around how things load into memory a lot more. And so what you'll find with a lot of N64 titles that want to be seen as big is that they take a lot of tricky routes to be big, right? Like Super Mario 64 is ostensibly a really huge game, right? It takes a long time to beat. But each level makes you go through it like 6 times in order to get all the stars, right? And in order to move between levels, you don't just have a level select screen that would take no time to navigate. You have this whole hub world, which you have to spend a lot of time running through, opening doors, and because of this, they can stretch the limited number of art assets and make it, feel a lot bigger than it would otherwise be. And also, you might notice that they heavily reuse most assets. Every level is going to have some of the same enemies, items, some of the same floors that just have a new texture on them, that kind of thing. And every idea, no matter how unique, is used more than once, right? There are like 3 different levels where you slide down a big old slidey thing, and that kind of mentality of we have to make the game last as long as it can, even if we don't have, the space and the graphical fidelity to make it last that long, carries over into all of the early N64 titles. It even carries forward a lot into a bunch of titles for later systems. And so because of this, there's a lot of things in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that are built to drag on, right? They added tons of cutscenes that you can't skip through because that takes time. You have to sit through them. They added tons of special animations for different things. Whenever you open a chest, boom, special animation, special sound effect. It takes extra time to go through that animation. They put this big empty hub world where you have to run from one end to the other to switch between levels. And, and they made it so that there are 2 versions of this hub world that hold the 2 different sets of levels. And that in order to switch between them, you have to travel to a specific point, go through a lengthy cutscene, then travel some more. And, honestly, this ideology of, basically just padding the game so that the player doesn't feel like they've been cheated extends to a lot of things you wouldn't expect, like enemy design. Most of the enemies in the game are designed with the very simple system of most of the time they're invulnerable, and then after a set amount of time they'll open up to a weak spot and then you can hit them, right? Some enemies you can be creative and get around their invulnerability. You can use dungeon items, bombs, things like that to get past them. But for the most part, you have to fight on the schedule that the enemy has. And the more enemies you fight, the more that is the case, and so the longer the game will take. And yeah, that's basically it. And that's why a lot of the bosses in this game are so formulaic, right? Like, you don't just do everything as quickly as you possibly can. You hit the boss, with their thing to make them vulnerable, and then you hit them as much as you can during their vulnerability phase, and then they do an animation where they get back up and go away, and then you have to do the thing to make them vulnerable again. And every single boss is like that. The first boss is like that. King Dodongo is like that. They're all like that. Even Ganondorf, right? Like, how do you make Ganondorf vulnerable to being hit? Well, you play energy tennis, then you hit him with a light arrow, and then you can swords. That's how it works. That's how every single fight in the game works. You have to take it at its own pace and wait, because they didn't want you to finish the game too quickly and feel like you were gypped. So that is how the game is built. Now, that said, the game is still very fun, and if you know some speedrun strats or are willing to just sort of brute force your way past these slowdown elements, you can actually end up getting through the game pretty quickly. But it's intended to take a certain amount of time, and they did everything they could to make sure it would take that amount of time, no matter how good you are. And it's kind of annoying, honestly. Kind of annoying. The dungeons in this game are kind of complex, because they're the first ones in 3D, and so they have a lot of verticality and loops and things like that to play around with. But they're also very straightforward in terms of like the actual paths available to you at any given moment. For the most part, there is one intended route through each dungeon, and you follow that route to the letter. There are occasionally branches that go off the main route for a little bit, and then you have to backtrack, but there aren't really any alternate paths through the dungeon, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. I would say that this style of dungeon design is fine, but not exciting. Like, it gives you the opportunity to focus much more on, the decor and the theming and what kind of enemies are going to be in the dungeon and, the exact experience of going through it. But it's not as open-ended and puzzly and exciting as what we saw in A Link to the Past. Or, well, more appropriately, Link's Awakening. Link to the Past was also mostly linear. There were a couple of, branching paths here and there, but mostly linear. Now, I don't think linearity is a bad thing. Some people seem to view it as a dirty word, and those people are silly. Quite frankly, linearity gives you the ability to make a more tailored experience, and tailored experiences are better, right? Like, if being random and out of order was the best thing in the world, then everyone would be playing roguelikes instead of Assassin's Creed, And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of roguelikes out there, but they all suck. And they all get very boring after about 2 runs, because, hey, look, it's the exact same fucking shit, just in a random order. Woo. How fucking exciting. Now, hitting randomize only works once for entertainment value, and it really only works in a game you've already fallen in love with. If you play Ocarina of Time a dozen times and then you pick up the Master Quest version, that will feel like a weird, like, mirror world experience, and it'll be kind of, interesting in that way, but it won't you know, like you wouldn't play 1,000 different versions of the Master Quest and be just as excited each time, you know? There's just no point to that. So, yeah. So when it comes to this game, what is the experience? Since it is fairly linear and fairly tailored, what is the experience? Now, some people will fight me on that because some people think linear is bad and they want to defend the game from being called bad, but it's not bad. And yes, I know you can technically do some of the dungeons out of order, but like not really. Like you kind of have to go at least far enough into each dungeon to get the dungeon item in the intended order and then break rank. So like you can do the first half of each thing in order and then do the second half in whatever order you want. But that's stupid. Just do the whole thing all at once. And, I mean, really. There are some that you can't even access out of order because you have to wait for a cutscene to trigger, The world here is pretty big. There's a decent number of mini games, but not like a ton. I mean, it was probably considered a lot for the time, but, Twilight Princess puts it to sleep in terms of secondary content. Like, Jesus. Well, and of course, the very next title, Majora's Mask, is basically all side content. So, But then again, Majora's Mask only has 4 dungeons, so it's pretty easy to see how that differs. As far as like the theming on the dungeons and everything, they're pretty good. You've got some pretty unique locations. Inside a tree, inside a fish. The water temple is probably the most complex one. The only annoying part about it, like, I don't understand the memes of, water temple, The only annoying part about it is switching the iron boots on and off. But honestly, you switch through the pause menu so quickly, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, if it took as long to pause and unpause as it does in, like, Breath of the Wild, then it would be really fucking annoying. But, which is kind of why I don't understand why Breath of the Wild went back to doing that for every single dungeon, but whatever. What do I know? The game has a pretty vibrant cast of side characters to interact with. The mask trading quest makes it, a lot more interesting to interact with certain NPCs. In fact, the trading quests throughout the game, because there's like 4 of them, kind of force you to explore a lot of the game and go to places you otherwise might not. If you want to get the Goron sword, then you're going to have to, the big Goron sword, then you're going to have to go through this whole multi-step trading quest that involves, several timed transportations and a whole bunch of stuff. And if you pull it off, then you get the best weapon in the game. I do feel it's kind of cheap that it's stronger than the Master Sword and that you still have it on you after the Master Sword is taken away from you during the final battle. So it's a little... But, whatever. I mean, it does have the trade-off if you can't use a shield with it, so it's something. Overall, the enemy design is pretty interesting and memorable. Like, I could probably go through in order which enemies I encountered on my first playthrough because they look so unique and memorable, and they're placed with a lot of thought and care, and you know, it's just like well done. I mean, like the first time I saw the pea hats in the overworld, I I just like completely lost my shit. You know, how the fuck? You know, and then the first time, well, like right after that, when I was on my way into the village or to Castletown, but I got locked out because I took too long, and so I had to deal with the Stalfos coming up and Galarian and such. It was quite a compelling game. You know, there's a lot of memorable moments. You know, collecting the Skulltulas is nice. You know, having things to do in the world, reasons to explore beyond just, you know, here's a piece of heart, here's some money. Those are really great. You know, I wish there were better rewards throughout the Skulltula quest so that people would actually be, you know, encouraged to finish it. But yeah, whatever. There's lots of interesting things to find throughout the game. You know, there's empty bottles and pieces of heart and, you know, healing shields and all kinds of things just out there in the world for you to find. The time travel mechanic opens up a lot more things because you can use the beans in a very interesting way, and that's really cool. I really like that. You know, there's so many like little side things to do with the Ocarina. You know, like you run into this group of frogs and you play a song for them. And really, you know, it's just all around like a good game, a really fully realized world. You know, even right now as I'm talking, I don't have the game in front of me, but I can clearly see each area that I refer to. You know, I know exactly what the layout of the Kokiri Forest is. I know exactly how to get through the Lost Woods without listening to the song. I know exactly where, you know, all the pieces of heart are on your way up to the Zora's domain. Like, it's a really well realized world, and part of the reason everything is so recognizable is the low poly count. You know, everything has kind of the same shape to it, so they really had to differentiate things with colors and textures and layout. And so, you know, each area feels very uniquely like its own area, and that's really great for, you know, making it easy to remember where you are, where you're going, what kind of stuff you're going to encounter. So it's really cool. I really, really like it. I would say it probably doesn't deserve the accolades of being the best game ever because, as I mentioned before, it does pad its runtime in ways that feel a little bit like it doesn't respect the player's time. And, you know, it's not hard by any measure. There aren't that many mini games, and the ones that you do have are just kind of meh, like the shooting range or the bomb shoe thing, and like shooting arrows with the N64 is not accurate or easy. Like yes, you know where the arrow is going to go but there's no actual reticule to show you what the midpoint is, and there's no like real feedback on it until you fire. And of course, you're aiming with one joystick, right? You don't even have dual joysticks to aim with. It's a mess. And of course, there's no aim assist because this is before that existed. So like precision aiming with a single joystick, nah. It just doesn't work very well. 99% of the time when you're shooting at something, you're gonna be Z targeted because you just don't want to deal with the hassle. I mean, it's not impossible to line up a shot, but to do it quickly and repeatedly like you need to for the minigame, very much not okay. You could say that the DS version improves on this because it has gyro aiming and all that, but counterpoint, the DS version sucks ass. Now, part of it is just the tiny little DS screen, but like, Jesus Christ, does it look awful. Like, it's supposed to be HD or whatever, but when you're on that little like 3-inch screen, it looks pixelated and shitty no matter what. And also the animations don't really look like none of the models look like anyone gave a shit when they were building them, like in the N64 game, yes, it's polygons and you can see the polygons, but because of that, they had to put a lot of time and effort into making sure that this looks like the person they're trying to make it look like. They put in a ton of effort into making sure that the polygons were lined up just right, that the colors and the textures were lined up just right. And in the remake, it feels like, they just sort of outsourced it to a third-party studio who didn't really give a shit and, just made some generic models that look kind of like the correct character, but you can't really tell and you don't really care. I've seen some footage of the remake emulated with like an upscaler and everything, and that footage looks unbelievably good. Like, holy shit, that's good. But that's not how it looks when you're playing on the 3DS. So, yeah. And I mean, like, even really basic things like how they couldn't really do like full 3D environments. So what they would do is they put out a flat plane, and then when you run into a wall, that wall is represented by a flat image, just a pre-rendered image of like trees or whatever, and it looks shit, right? But when you load up the 3DS version, it looks equally shit because it's equally a shitty flat 3D rendered image, and Whereas, if you play, say, Twilight Princess, and you run through Hyrule Fields and you get to the end, you can see that there's like a cliff and then tree objects on top of the cliff, and then that's your boundary line, right? It's not just a wall with a tree texture in front of it, like it's a bunch of objects that actually make up the borderline and have collision and stuff. And that's clearly what they always wanted it to be. So why is it that when they remade the game, they didn't use that same method? They used the shitty method that's true to the original, but doesn't represent what the original was trying to be. Bad remake. A remake or remaster or whatever should always try to fix the inherent limitations of the original, you know? Like, if there were hardware limitations, or if there were time crunch issues, or, whatever it was, every game has its flaws. The remaster should be the version that fixes as many of those flaws as possible, you know? But a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They just take the original as like this sacred masterpiece that can never be sullied, and just refuse to improve on it in any way. And Nintendo is kind of the worst about this. All of their remakes suck. All of the Zelda remakes that I've seen or played have been complete dog shit. They don't do anything to improve on the original. They don't add any necessary features. They don't remove any annoyances. They're just there to make a quick buck and waste everyone's time while they don't develop the next Zelda game. It's ridiculous. So yeah. Overall, Ocarina of Time is a good game. It's memorable. It's fun. It had a lot of love and care put into it. But its time has passed. It is a relic of its age. And I understand falling in love with it when it came out and always wanting to hold on to those memories no matter what. But it shows its age. It's not as good as some of the titles that have come since. And it's not as good as some of the games in other series that have come since. You have to give props for being the first, But the first game is never the best game. The first anything is never the best anything. The Wright brothers made the first airplane, but we would not fly in that plane today. No one would trust that plane today, right? We have iterated, we have improved, we have made much better. We didn't stop with the first jet engine. We didn't stop with the first atom bomb. We didn't stop with the first light bulb. You have to improve. You have to get better over time. And the simple fact is that most of the time, the thing that comes in, at the end and fully, compresses everything together, fully realizes all of the past ideas with new tech, that's the best thing, I don't understand why people think that the oldest thing is always the best. The first set of Magic may have been interesting in its time, but it's pretty dog shit in terms of balance and design. Like, you've got the power 7, you've got 1 mana, 3 damage spells, you've got, meanwhile you're spending, 5 mana to drop a 4/4. Like, it's insane. Actually, is it like 6 mana? How much does Sarah Angel cost? Too much. I think it's 5. But yeah, that my basic point is just that, like, sometimes people have a good idea, and and the first game that does it isn't always going to be the best to do it, and honestly, the best parts of Ocarina are the parts that they stole from Link to the Past and iterated on. Parts they improved from a previous game. The new stuff is usually the stuff that struggles the most to be, as good, because it hasn't had as much time to be polished and refined. So what I would say is, don't put so much value in the fact that it's the first of its kind. You have to respect the people who came up with it, and the innovation that went into it, and the fact that it was first. But don't think that just because it's first, nothing else can compare, you know? So yeah, that's my takeaway from this game. It's good. It's definitely worth being in, like, a list of the good Zelda games. Uh, but I wouldn't say it's the best by any measure. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below how you feel about it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Okay, end card time. I'm supposed to tell you to like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid YouTube shit. There's a bell thingy, whatever. I have all the social media stuff: Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Mostly I use Facebook and Twitter to tell you about my Twitch and YouTube uploads. I've got a Patreon, but Patreon is one of those things where people who can afford to throw away money give money to people who can't. And so if you can't afford to throw away money, then you shouldn't be doing that. And if you can afford to throw away money, consider charities. There's a pandemic, there's global warming, there's millions of people in the world who don't have toilets, which is just awful. So I've linked a few charities in the description down below in case you're interested in that. And if you can't donate money to a charity, consider donating some of your time, because that's also very useful. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.